They tell you war has rules. They write them in thick books. Teach them in classrooms with climate control and coffee. Men in pressed uniforms stand at podiums and explain, with perfect confidence, exactly what a human being will do under fire. I believed them once. Then, I met Sergeant Dara Vasquez on day 11 of the Karangal operation, elbow deep in a man's chest cavity, singing softly to herself some half-remembered lullaby from a childhood she never talked about, while mortar rounds walked themselves toward her position like something looking for an address. She didn't stop singing. She didn't stop working. The man lived. 3 hours later, I watched her acquire a target through a scope with the same hands, the same stillness, the same soft exhalation she used to slow her pulse when things got loud inside a patient's chest. 220 meters. One breath out. Then, the hands that had just rebuilt a man went ahead and, in the particular and terrible grammar of that valley, unmade another. I have thought about that for 11 years. I have thought about what it costs to hold both of those things in the same pair of hands. To be the one who heals and the one who ends, not in different lifetimes, not in different wars, but in the same 16-hour shift, in the same unwashed uniform, under the same indifferent Afghan sky. The SEALs on that operation said they would never forget her. I believe them. But I don't think any of us, not the operators, not the commanders, not the trauma counselors who came later with their careful questions, fully understood what we were asking her to carry. This is what I saw. This is what I failed to understand until much, much later. What follows is not a hero story. It is a story about a woman who contained two people inside one body, and what happened on the day both of them were needed at exactly the same moment. It is the most human thing I have ever witnessed. I have never recovered from it. The first thing you need to understand about Sergeant Dara Vasquez is that she kept her medical kit organized the way other people keep promises. Everything in its place. Everything earned. The QuikClot in the left outer pocket, the Israeli bandages beside it, the nasopharyngeal airway tucked at an angle she'd calculated would shave exactly 1 second off retrieval time under stress. She'd tested it. She'd actually stood in the dark outside the FOB one night, eyes closed, and practiced the reach 17 times until her hand moved there without thinking, the way a tongue finds a loose tooth. I know this because she told me, during one of the 3 conversations we had before everything changed. We were eating MREs that tasted like compressed sadness, and she was explaining her kit with the same focused intensity most people reserve for talking about someone they love. The second you're thinking about where something is, she said, somebody's bleeding out. Her voice was even. Not clinical. Not cold. More like a carpenter talking about the angle of a cut, a person who had thought very deeply about the relationship between precision and consequence. I was embedded with the unit as a documentation officer. My job, officially, was to maintain operational records. My actual job, the one nobody wrote down, was to sit very still and try to understand things that resisted understanding. Dara Vasquez resisted understanding. She'd been a combat medic for 6 years by the time I met her, which means she'd spent 6 years being both the most important person in a firefight and the one person forbidden to initiate one. Her rules of engagement had a specific flavoring that I found quietly monstrous the longer I thought about it. She could return fire only in direct self-defense. She could rush into a kill zone to drag a wounded man out. She could work on casualties while the world tried to murder her. But she couldn't move first. She described this once, not to me but to Petty Officer 2nd Class Reeves, Riv, to everyone who was cleaning his rifle nearby and not pretending not to listen. It's not that it bothers me, she said. Riv looked up. It's that it doesn't, she said. That's what bothers me. She went back to rechecking her kit. Riv went back to his rifle. I wrote nothing down, because some things you don't put in a report. The Karangal Valley in those years had a particular quality of violence that men who'd been in other places and other wars described as personal. Like the mountains had decided. Like the terrain itself had an agenda and you were either its instrument or its material. We'd been there 11 days when the operation went sideways. It went sideways the way things in that valley always went sideways, not with the cinematic explosion of a Hollywood ambush, but with the sudden, terrible subtraction of sound. One moment there was the normal texture of a patrol, boots on rock, radio static, somebody ahead asking for a GPS check. Then, that was gone, replaced by a silence that lasted exactly 3 seconds, and 3 seconds in a place like that is long enough to count your entire life. Then, everything was noise. I hit the ground because the man in front of me hit the ground and my body simply copied his without consulting my brain. Somewhere to my left a voice was calling a grid coordinate with the practiced calm of someone reciting a grocery list, which meant they were either not afraid or they'd been afraid for so long it had metabolized into something else entirely. I would later learn that voice was Dara's. At the time, I was occupied with the gravel approximately 2 inches from my face, which was the most interesting gravel I had ever encountered. What I saw, what I can reconstruct from my own fractured perspective and, from the accounts of men who were in better positions to observe, was this: within 40 seconds of the initial contact, 2 operators were down. Sergeant First Class Okafor had taken a round through the left thigh, femoral territory, bad, the kind of wound with a countdown attached to it. Private First Class Hernandez had a penetrating chest wound and was making the particular sound that chest wounds make, the wet-sucking poetry of a lung that's found a new exit. Dara was moving before anyone gave an order. This is the part that the operators, the SEALs attached to the element, who had seen considerable things, would talk about later. The speed wasn't surprising. The quality of the movement was surprising. It wasn't running. It was something that had no name in English that I know of, some pure physical articulation of necessity, where a body stops containing a person and becomes entirely a function. She reached Okafor first because he was closer and, the femoral is a race against arithmetic. Tourniquet. Placement. Tightened. The sequence took 11 seconds. I know because Master Chief Delacroix counted and told me afterward, in the flat tone of a man recalibrating his understanding of what people are capable of. 11 seconds, he said. I've seen guys in controlled training take 45. Then, she was at Hernandez. The chest wound needed a SEAL, needed it immediately, needed her hands to think for her while her conscious mind was occupied with a dozen other inputs: incoming fire, the positions of her teammates, the sound of 2 helicopters that were still 22 minutes away, the particular pitch of Hernandez's breathing that was telling her things a stethoscope would have confirmed more slowly. She worked. What I could see from my position, prone, behind a rock the size of a small refrigerator, technically useless, was her back. The set of her shoulders. The way her hands moved with that carpenter's certainty even as rounds kicked up dirt 10 meters to her left. She was still singing. The same lullaby. Very quiet. Not for Hernandez, he probably couldn't hear it. For herself, I would later understand. A metronome. A way of keeping her own pulse at a pace that allowed her hands to do what they needed to do. I have tried to describe this to people who weren't there and I can't do it well. The closest I've gotten is this: it looked like prayer. Not the performed kind. The real kind. The kind that happens in the body before it reaches the mouth. Both men were alive when the medevac lifted off. The unit consolidated. Accounted for themselves. The particular arithmetic of a firefight: how many in, how many standing, how many leaving other ways. Everyone standing. Except for the thing that had left Dara's face. I noticed it as she cleaned her hands with the sterile wipes from her kit, working carefully between her fingers the way she'd been trained to, removing evidence of what her hands had needed to do. Her expression was the same. Same set mouth. Same eyes that processed the middle distance at a frequency slightly above normal. But something was gone from behind it. I don't know what to call it. The medical literature would probably have words. I had only the observation: the woman who'd been singing was still present in her body, but the song was finished, and the silence where it had been was a specific kind of silence. Riv came and stood beside her without saying anything. After a moment he offered her half a Cliff Bar, which she took and ate without looking at it. That was, he started. Don't, she said. Not harshly. The way you say don't to someone reaching for a stove that's still hot. Protective. He nodded. Ate his half of the bar. They stood there in the particular fellowship of people who understand that some things are too large for language and have decided to stand next to each other instead. I caught up with her that evening, at the edge of the FOB where the light was going gold over the mountains in a way that seemed offensive given the nature of the day. She was writing in a notebook, actual handwritten notebook, green cover, crammed with small careful letters, and she didn't look up when I sat down nearby. I had not been invited. I sat down anyway, because I had learned in 11 days that waiting for an invitation from Dara Vasquez was a strategy with no exit. Recording, she asked. Still not looking up. Trying to understand, I said. She wrote something. Turned a page. What did you want to know? How do you do that? I said. Work on someone while someone's actively trying to kill me. She said it the way you'd finish a sentence for someone who's taking too long. Same as anything else. You don't think about the shooting. You think about the job. That simple? She looked up then. Her eyes had a quality I'd noticed before but couldn't name, a kind of density, like there was more going on behind them than the aperture was designed to show. No, she said. Not simple. You just don't have room for both. You fill up with the job and the other thing has nowhere to go. She looked back at her notebook. The other thing waits, though. That's what people don't tell you. It waits and it collects interest. I didn't write that down either. Some things you keep in your body instead. Her history, assembled from fragments over 11 days, grew up in Laredo. Father was a mechanic, mother was a nurse who worked nights and slept days and was therefore present in the house the way a roomer is present, felt more than seen. Dara had learned to make dinner at age 9, not because she was precocious but because someone had to, and the role had suited something in her that needed to be needed. She'd wanted to be a doctor. Straight A's through high school. A scholarship that evaporated when the financial aid office made an error and the appeals process moved at the particular pace of institutions that are not incentivized to move faster. She'd enlisted at 19. The Army gave her medic training and she took to it with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting their whole life for a vocation to justify the way their brain already worked. This is all backstory. I tell it only because she never would have, not in those words, not in that order. What she'd told me directly, in pieces, across 3 conversations, my mother smelled like the hospital even on her days off. I thought that was what love smelled like for a long time. And, the first time I lost someone on the table, I went outside and looked at the sky for a while. Then, I went back in. You have to go back in. And, once, almost by accident, I had a brother. Then, nothing. The notebook appeared from somewhere. The conversation ended. I had a brother. Past tense. 2 words that weighed more than everything else she'd said combined. I never asked. She never offered. We both respected the weight of it. On day 13, 2 days after the contact that had sent Okafor and Hernandez out, the unit was tasked with a new operation. I will not describe the operational details. They are not mine to describe and they are not the point. The point is that the element's designated marksman, Petty Officer First Class Garland, a quiet man from Alabama who pronounced 3-syllable words with the patient care of someone who learned them from books, had taken a fragment to the right shoulder in the same contact that put Okafor down. His arm was functional. His trigger work was not. Not to the standard the operation required. The brief happened in a small room with a low ceiling and a map on the wall. I was present because documentation required me to be, and because Master Chief Delacroix had stopped trying to make me leave rooms. The mission required a sniper. The element had 1 marksman who couldn't shoot and, for operators whose skill set ran to close-in work. The tactical problem was clear and the solution was not. Dara was in the back of the room. Notebook. Writing. Master Chief laid it out flat. Anyone here qualified above the basic marksman card, he asked, not to the room generally, but in the specific way that means he already knows the answer. Silence. Then, what standard? Her voice. Same even tenor. Like asking what's for dinner. Delacroix turned. I think the rest of the room turned. I definitely turned. She had put down the notebook. What standard for the shot? She repeated. The silence lasted long enough that I counted it. 4 seconds. Expert, Delacroix said. She looked at the map on the wall. At the elevation marks, the grid coordinates, the penciled circle around an objective. Okay, she said. One word. Not I can do this. Not I'll try. Not the performed bravado that I had heard from a dozen men in a dozen briefings. Just the flat economy of someone who has assessed a variable and found it within tolerance. Okay. The room did something I cannot fully describe. It didn't cheer. It didn't congratulate. It did the military equivalent of a breath released, a collective physical acknowledgement that a problem had been solved, and the solving had come from a direction nobody had been looking. Riv looked at her with an expression I later decided was the closest thing he owned to reverence. She picked up her notebook and kept writing. I found out later, from Riv, who had served with her for 2 years and collected her history the way some people collect debts, that she'd qualified expert on the rifle range 3 years running. That she'd asked twice to cross-train as a designated marksman and been denied twice, not for performance reasons but for classification reasons, for the taxonomy of roles that the institution had decided should not overlap. She'd kept the qualification. Kept practicing, on her own time, with borrowed rifles, in the way people keep skills they were told they wouldn't need. Why? I asked River. He shrugged. Then, she said the job might need it someday. I thought about that for a long time. The job might need it someday. Not I might need it. Not I want to. The job. The function. The thing she served that was larger than what she'd been assigned. I thought about the stove she'd been kept away from and the way she'd kept her hands warm beside it anyway, just in case. That night, before the operation, I watched her do something I hadn't seen before. She was at the edge of the perimeter, flat on her stomach, a borrowed rifle she'd asked Garland to zero for her weight across her arms. She was dry firing into the dark. Breathing in, firing. Breathing in, firing. The sequence she'd perfected in her medical kit translated here exactly, the same precision, the same deliberate economy, the same quality of a person filling themselves entirely with the job so the other thing had nowhere to go. The lullaby was there again. Very quiet. Just her lips and the dark and the rifle and the repetition of the breath. I sat down at a respectful distance and watched a woman rehearse the dual grammar of her particular kind of courage, the thing that heals and the thing that ends, living in the same body, both of them real, neither of them at peace with the other. She knew I was there. She didn't stop. After 20 minutes she rolled over, sat up, field stripped the rifle, cleaned it with the same hands that had cleaned themselves of Okafor's blood 2 days before, and reassembled it without looking. Get some sleep, she said. Is that an order? It's information, she said. Do what you want with it. I did not sleep. I wrote instead, trying to find the words for what I was watching, which was this: a person assembling herself, piece by piece, from what the institution had given her and what the institution had refused her, into something precise and necessary and entirely her own. I didn't find the words that night. I'm still looking. Part 2 continues the next morning. The operation. The shot. And the thing I didn't understand until I stopped trying to understand it. The morning had that particular Karangal quality of being both beautiful and actively malevolent. The mountains in early light looked like a painting some enormous creature had made and then abandoned, all austere geometry, the rock the color of old bone, the sky above it that specific shade of blue that has no name in English but which I associate permanently now with the smell of coal and diesel and something underneath both that I cannot identify and choose not to try. I had slept 2 hours on a cot that argued with my spine. Dara looked like she'd slept 8, which I resented on a cellular level. She was eating powdered eggs from a steel cup, methodical spoonfuls, reading something in her green notebook, not writing, for once, reading back through older pages with the expression of a person checking their math. I watched her turn a page, stop, read something twice, close the notebook. Whatever she'd found in there, she put it away. Today's the day your stomach's going to bother you, she said, without looking up from the eggs. I'm fine. Not now. Later. She finally looked at me. Happens to everyone the first time they're inside something that's actually moving. Your body knows before your brain. I didn't ask what she meant by moving. I found out. The objective was a compound 3 kilometers into the valley, nested against the slope in the way that buildings in that place nested, like they were trying to become part of the rock, to be mistaken for something that had always been there. The intelligence always said that there was a particular individual inside who had contributed materially to the particular variety of violence that the valley had been practicing on our element for 11 days. The tactical picture, as Delacroix explained it in the pre-dawn brief, the approach required suppression of a fighting position at the northeast corner of the compound, at an elevation that made direct assault effectively a donation to the enemy's body count. A marksman could address it from the ridge to the west. The marksman shot would open the approach. The approach would achieve the objective. Clean, on paper. The word marksman sat in the room differently now than it had the day before. Everyone knew who it meant. Nobody said her name, because in that context her name was a designation, a function, a specific capability being applied to a specific problem. She was sitting beside Riv, and she was taping her fingers, a long piece of medical tape wrapped precisely around her right index finger, the knuckle, around again, and she looked like she was somewhere else slightly ahead of where her body was. Riv was watching her. Not checking on her. Just watching. The way you watch someone you know well, cataloging them, making sure the person you think you know is the same person sitting next to you. She felt him watching. She didn't look up. "I'm okay," she said. He nodded. Went back to his own prep. She pulled the tape tighter. One more wrap. Her fingers were not shaking. I checked. I checked because I needed to know, the way you need to know a load-bearing wall is where you think it is. They were still. We moved at 0430, which is the hour when the mountains have the most gravity and, the least mercy, when the cold settles into the marrow with the intention of staying there. I was positioned behind the main element, which is documentation officer code for allowed to observe while standing slightly outside of the worst of it, a position I occupied with the complicated gratitude of a man who is aware his survival depends on other people's courage. Dara moved with the element. Not attached to the main assault group, she and Riv were peeling off northwest, 200 meters, to get her into position on the ridge. I watched them separate from the element in the gray pre-dawn light, moving low and fast through terrain that looked like God had been angry when he made it, and I felt something that took me a moment to identify. It was the particular helplessness of watching someone walk towards something you can't follow them into. Not the mission. The interior thing. The place she was going inside herself. I was with the main element on the approach when the first rounds came from the northeast corner. The position was exactly where the intelligence had said it would be, which is not always how these things go and, which felt, in the moment, like the universe offering a small and temporary apology. The element took cover. Returned fire. The specific calculus of keeping heads down while the problem gets solved. And, then, the ridge shot. 220 meters. I did not see it. I heard it, a single report, a specific sharpness distinct from the sustained fire around me, a sound that had a different grammar from everything else happening, precise where everything else was chaotic. Then, the fire from the northeast corner stopped. The silence where it had been lasted 4 seconds. Then, Delacroix's voice on the radio, "Move." The element moved. I don't know what I expected to feel. Something clarifying, maybe. Some clean narrative conclusion, the problem solved, the day proceeding, the mission achieved through the precise application of a specific skill. The kind of story you could tell afterward in 4 sentences. What I felt was nothing, which was its own kind of information. I filed it away and kept moving. The compound clearing took 22 minutes, which is a long time to be inside 22 minutes. By the time I got there, documentation officers, again, slightly behind the edge of everything, the element was consolidating, and Dara and Riv were coming down from the ridge. She'd slung the rifle. She had her medical kit unslung on her other side, which I noticed with the part of my brain that was still cataloging her, and, I thought, she never put it away. The whole time she was on that ridge with the rifle, the medical kit was still there. Both things. Same body. I thought about what that weight feels like. Not the physical weight, though both are real and considerable. The other weight. The one that doesn't have a unit of measurement. There were no additional casualties on the approach. The compound itself yielded 2 wounded, not ours, the other kind, which creates its own moral and medical arithmetic. Dara went to work. I watched Master Chief Delacroix watch her do it. He was a man who had achieved, through 20 years of extreme experience, a kind of emotional temperature regulation that most people can't manage. He ran warm when warmth was needed and very, very cold when that was needed, and he moved between those states with the efficiency of someone who'd mastered the thermostat. Watching her work on a man whose people had just tried to kill his element, his jaw did something. A small movement. The kind of face makes when it's trying to process a thing it doesn't have a file for. She was talking to the man while she worked. Not in Pashto, which she didn't speak. Not to inform him of what she was doing. Just talking, a low, steady murmur, the same even tenor, the same quality of voice she used when she explained her medical kit or when she talked about the job. Calming him the way you calm someone who doesn't need to understand the words. With the sound itself. With the fundamental message of I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. The man was afraid. He was also wounded, also young, also a long way from anywhere that felt safe, and she was talking to him with the patient intimacy of someone who has decided that fear, at its root, is the same language regardless of who speaks it. Riv, beside me, let out a breath. She does that every time, he said quietly. What? That thing. He gestured, unable to describe it more precisely, and I understood that he was gesturing at the whole of it, the kit, the rifle, the voice, the hands, the particular way she occupied both ends of the human spectrum without permission from anyone. Every time. I asked him, carefully, the way you ask a question you're not sure should be asked, does she ever talk about it? The switching? He was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. She told me once, he said, that it's all the same job. That the ones you save and the ones you stop from killing the ones you save, she said they both have to go somewhere. That she's just the somewhere. I've turned that over for 11 years. She's just the somewhere. The architecture of a sentence that contains more than architecture should hold. We were on the helicopter back to the FOB when I finally asked her. The rotors made everything a gesture, you had to lean close to hear anything, which gave conversations on helicopters an accidental intimacy, 2 people bent toward each other in the noise. The shot, I said. She looked out the window. The mountains moved underneath us, indifferent. What about it? What was it like, I said. Switching. Being one thing and, then, the other. She didn't answer immediately. Below us the valley floor tilted as the helicopter banked, and I watched her watch it with a quality of attention I can only describe as geological, the way you look at something old that has been through more than you have. You know what I keep thinking about, she said finally. I waited. There was a moment. Up on that ridge. I was in the scope. She paused. And I could see my patient board at the FOB in my head. All the names. Who I'd worked on, who was stable, who needed checking. Both things were just there. At the same time. She touched the strap of her medical kit without seeming to know she was doing it. I don't switch. That's the thing people don't get. I don't go from one to the other. I'm just always both. The helicopter lurched in a thermal. Neither of us moved. Does that bother you? I asked. Inadequately. She looked at me then, the first time she'd looked at me during the conversation, which meant she was about to say something she needed me to actually hear. It would bother me more, she said, if I couldn't. Back at the FOB, in the particular decompression that follows operations, the organized chaos of after-action, equipment cleaning, food that tastes like continuity, I watched Dara sit down against the wall of the medical bay, her green notebook open in her lap, and write for 45 minutes without stopping. I don't know what she wrote. She never showed me. I know that when she stopped, she looked up at the wall for a long moment with an expression that had no name in my vocabulary, that lived somewhere between resolution and grief and something further than grief that I want to call reckoning, even though I know the word isn't quite right. Then, she got up and went to check on her patient board. That evening, Delacroix found me at the edge of the FOB. He was a man who did not usually look for people. He located them, which is a different thing. He sat down beside me, an honor I wasn't sure I'd earned, and was quiet for a while in the way men like him are quiet, which is to say completely and deliberately. Then, you writing about her? I'm trying, I said. Get it right, he said. I told him I was trying. No, he said, quietly. You want to try. But, you need to get it right. He stood up. We'll be telling this story for 20 years, he said. Make sure it tells the right thing. I asked him what the right thing was. He turned back to look at me with an expression that I decided afterward was as close as a man like him got to asking for something. That it cost her, he said. Make sure whoever reads it understands that it cost her. She's not extraordinary because it was easy. She's extraordinary because she paid the price of it anyway. He walked back into the FOB. I sat with that until the stars came out, which in the Korangal in October is an event. The sky out there does not offer stars so much as aim them at you, precise and overwhelming, and I sat under that enormous aim and thought about a woman with two things in her hands and no way to put either of them down, and a voice that kept singing to keep herself steady while the cost of it all collected interest in the dark. Late that night, I heard the lullaby. It was coming from outside the wire, which made no sense and sent me to the window with a cold stomach before I understood what I was hearing. She was on the perimeter, her green notebook on her knee, and she was singing to herself the way she always did, the same half-remembered thing from a childhood she never talked about, and the song was so quiet and the night was so still that I could hear it all the way from where I was standing. I didn't go out. Some things are not for observers. Some things are the private payment of a private toll, and the correct response from everyone else in earshot is to go very still and let the sound be what it is. So I stood at the window. The stars aimed at her. She kept singing. And I thought about what Riv had said, she's just the somewhere. The place it all goes. The person who absorbs both ends of the spectrum and keeps singing and keeps working and keeps her kit organized, because the second you're thinking about where something is, somebody's bleeding out. I thought about her brother. The past tense of him. I thought about the medical tape still wrapped around her finger from the morning. I thought about the way her hands hadn't shaken. I did not sleep. Part 3 is the morning she told me to stop documenting. And what she said instead. And why I have spent 11 years trying to decide if she was right. She found me on day 15 writing her name in my report. Not the operational details, those were in separate files, correctly formatted, language stripped to the bone. This was the other document, the one I'd been keeping in parallel, the one nobody had officially sanctioned but nobody had told me to stop, my attempt to put into words what I was watching her be. She stood in the doorway of the small room I was using as an office in the way that any surface with a laptop on it becomes an office in a FOB, which is to say barely and apologetically, and she watched me type for a moment before saying anything. What's that one? Personal notes, I said. About me. Not a question. The way a woman who has been observed her entire life can identify the specific quality of being observed, the angle of attention, the way a pen or a cursor has your particular frequency. Partly, I said. She came in and sat down across from me on an ammunition can that someone had repurposed as a chair, which is the correct level of comfort for whatever conversation was about to happen. What are you going to do with it? She said. I don't know yet. She looked at my laptop screen. I let her look. She read for a moment, and her face did nothing, which was a kind of expression in itself. You're getting some of it wrong, she said. My hand stopped. Which part? She looked out the small window. The mountains were there, as they were always there, in the way things you can't escape are always there. The part where I'm a symbol, she said. I want to be precise about what she said next, because I have replayed it enough times to have worn it smooth in certain places, and I want to be careful about the places I might have filled in from my own need. She said, I know what you want it to mean. I can see what you're building. She said, you want me to be the proof of something. The woman who could do both. The argument that the institution was wrong about what I was capable of. She said, that's not a story about me. That's a story you're telling yourself about what you saw. I did not argue. Partly because she might have been right. Partly because there was something in her voice that had been there, now that I thought about it, since the first day, a quality I'd categorized as steadiness but, which I was beginning to understand was something more specific, the particular clarity of someone who has done a great deal of thinking about their own experience and, arrived, not at peace, but, at precision. Then, what's the story about? I asked. She was quiet long enough to make me nervous. You ever see a tree that's been struck by lightning? She said. I had. Once, in childhood, in Virginia, an oak that had been split clean down the center, the two halves still standing, still growing, still leafing out in summer, the scar between them darkened, deepened, permanent. She didn't know this. It wasn't a question. The tree doesn't become two trees, she said. But, it's not one tree anymore either. It's the same root system holding up two things that don't fit together and, neither one of them asked to be that way. She glanced at my screen. That's more like it. I thought about what she was saying. I thought, she has been this a long time. She's had years to find the image for it. Your brother, I said. The word landed the way words land when they are the precise size and weight of the thing they name. She didn't flinch. She didn't close up. She looked at me with an expression that I would later describe as forensic, the way you look at something to determine the nature of it, not whether it hurts. What about him? She said. You don't have to, I know I don't, she said. I'm asking what about him? I said, I think he's in the kit. She went very still. I said, the way you organized it. The way you've been carrying both things. I think he's somewhere in there. What she told me, compressed to its minimum viable unit, the way she would have wanted, with none of the elaboration she would have stripped out herself. Her brother Marcus had been in army infantry. 2 tours, the second to a place with the same grammar of violence as the Karengal, the same mountains with the same agenda. He'd come home technically intact, which is not the same as intact. He'd had 2 years of trying to carry both things, the person he'd been before and the person the experience had made, and the weight of that particular load had made him a person nobody recognized, not even him. He'd been 26. She'd been 23. She had just entered medic training. She'd been in a classroom learning the components of a medical kit when she got the call. She told me this in 3 sentences. Then, so I learned to organize the kit very well. Because the second you don't know where something is, she stopped. The sentence stayed unfinished in the room. The thing about a sentence that trails off, it doesn't end. It just stops, and you feel the weight of everything it would have said if it had kept going, and that weight is more precise than any ending. I didn't write while she was talking. Afterward, alone, I wrote everything I could remember, in the order I could remember it, and then, I stopped and sat with my hands flat on the table and thought about a girl in a classroom learning to save lives while her brothers ran out, and I thought about whether the lullaby was for him, originally, before it became a metronome, before it became the rhythm she used to keep her pulse at the pace her hands required. I thought about the tree with the lightning scar. 2 halves. Same root. Neither one asked to be that way. On day 16, I watched her teach. This was not scheduled. It happened the way things happen in those environments, organically, the way water finds its level. Riv had a minor bleed from a fragment that had caught him during a patrol and hadn't been worth mentioning until it was, and she sat him down and worked on it, and while she worked she talked, and the men nearby found reasons to be nearby, and the nearby became listening, and the listening became the specific kind of classroom that has no chairs. She talked about wound anatomy the way some people talk about maps, as if the territory is real and interesting and worth knowing for its own sake, not just for what you need to do in it. She talked about the physics of blood pressure, the rate of loss, the point at which the arithmetic changes and the variables that govern that point. She talked about fear, specifically about the way fear affects a body that is trying to work on another body, and what you do about that, not what you feel, but what you do, the physical adjustments, the breath, the deliberate focus. She talked about the kit. She went through it piece by piece, the same way she'd explained it to me on day one, and I watched the operators listen with the particular attention of people who are filing information in the category marked "This will matter," and I thought about how many of them had trained medics and been trained by medics and still found her specific way of explaining it worth listening to again. She talked about the lullaby. Not about what it was or where it came from. Just about the principle: find the thing that keeps your pulse where you need it and use it every time, so it becomes automatic, so your nervous system knows the association without being told. Doesn't have to be a song, she said. Could be a count, could be a prayer, could be your kid's name. Whatever it is, practice it not in the bad moments. Practice it until it's just a thing that happens. She sealed Riv's wound. Stood up. The lesson was over. The men dispersed back to what they'd been doing. Riv looked up at her with his jaw slightly too loose, which for Riv was the equivalent of speechless. "You never told me that," he said. "The lullaby thing. All this time. You never asked what I was doing," she said. "I thought you were just..." He stopped. "Singing?" "Yeah. I was," she said. "I was also keeping my pulse at 64. But both things can be true." She picked up her kit. Slung it on her shoulder. Checked that it was secure. "Both things are always true," she said. "That's the whole job." Day 17 was my last day in the valley. The documentation assignment was rotating. A new observer was coming in. I was going back to Kandahar, then Kabul, then eventually to a desk in a building where people wore iron clothes and discussed operational outcomes in the passive voice, which now seemed like a language from another planet. I spent most of the day finishing my reports, the official ones, flat and correct and stripped of everything that wasn't a verifiable fact. Then, I spent 2 hours on the other document, the parallel one, trying to get it closer to what she'd said and further from what I'd been building. She found me again. This was becoming a pattern. She had a quality of appearing when I was thinking about her hardest, which I was willing to accept as coincidence because the alternative required me to believe I was less unobtrusive than I thought. She sat down on the ammunition can. "Leaving tomorrow," she said. "Yes." She turned her green notebook over in her hands. Not opening it. Just the weight of it. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to use it correctly." I waited. "I don't think I was brave," she said. "I want you to understand that before you write whatever you're writing. I didn't decide to be brave. I had a skill and a moment that required it, and the two things found each other." "That might be what bravery is," I said. She looked at me. "Maybe," she said. "But the part that got me on that ridge wasn't bravery. It was the fact that doing nothing was worse." She opened the notebook now. "Not to show me anything. Just to have it open. I can't do nothing. That's not a virtue. It's a condition. I got it the same place I got the kit organization and the lullaby. From a 23-year-old girl in a classroom who answered the phone and found out that someone who needed a medic didn't have one." The notebook lay open in her lap. I looked at the pages, not reading them. I couldn't from where I was sitting, just looking at the fact of them. The years of them. The accumulation of a person in small, careful letters. "Marcus," I said. "Marcus," she said. The word was a headstone and a door and something else. She was still at the FOB when I left. The helicopter lifted and the valley dropped away beneath me, and I watched the compound grow small and then conceptual and then absent, and I kept my eyes on the perimeter until it became indistinguishable from the rock. I didn't see her. I looked anyway. 6 months later, in Kabul, I got an email from River. 2 sentences. "She's in Texas. Getting out in the spring." Then, she said to tell you she hopes you got it right. A year after that, a mutual contact told me that Dara Vasquez had enrolled in a physician assistant program at UT Health San Antonio. That she was 2 years in and doing well. That she'd been asked to speak at a veterans' mental health symposium and had turned it down, and then turned it down again, and then agreed on the condition that she was not introduced as a hero. I do not know what she said at that symposium. I know what she would have said, because I know how she thinks. Both things can be true and neither one asked to be, and the job is to carry them and keep your pulse at 64 and go back in every time because someone will need you, and the kid has to be organized and the song has to be practiced before the bad moments. The tree with the lightning scar. Still leafing out. I finished the document that night. Not the official one. The other one. I went through it 3 times, removing every sentence that made her a symbol. Removing the paragraphs where I'd built her into an argument about institutional limitations and the underestimation of women and the specific ways the military had failed to see what was in front of it. All of that was true. None of it was the point. The point, the thing Delacroix had told me to get right, was that it cost her. It cost her in ways she'd been paying since she was 23, since a classroom and a phone call, since a brother who'd needed something nobody knew how to give him. It cost her in the lullaby she'd been singing for years to keep herself level. It cost her in the green notebook she filled with what it felt like to be the somewhere, the place it all goes, both ends of the spectrum, both things true at once. She paid that price. She paid it every time. She is probably paying it right now, in a classroom in San Antonio, learning the names of things she already knows how to fix. And she went back in. Every time. That's not bravery, she told me. But I watched her for 17 days and I have thought about it for 11 years and I am fairly certain she is wrong about that. And I think this is closer, I think she was describing the same thing from the inside that looks different from the outside, and both descriptions are accurate, and that is the most human sentence I know how to write about her. The SEALs on that operation say they will never forget her. I believe them. I believe them because men like that do not speak in hyperbole, they are the people who have already seen the outer edge of what humans are capable of, and what they say next, after all of that, tends to mean exactly what it says. But I also believe that what they are remembering is not the shot. It is not the 11 seconds for the tourniquet, not the ridge, not the rifle, not the way she moved through the kill zone with the absolute geometry of necessity. It is the lullaby. It is the woman singing herself steady while the world tried to pull her apart, and the way she kept working anyway, and the way she never, not once, put down either of the things she was carrying. That is the thing that won't leave you. That is the thing you keep like a stone in your pocket, something to put your hand on when you need to remember what you've seen people be. She never sent me anything from the notebook. I thought she might. I waited, in the way you wait for things you know probably aren't coming. A year after Riv's email, a small envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside, a single page, torn from a green notebook, covered in the small careful letters I recognized. Not a message. Not an explanation. A list. Every person she'd worked on in the Korangal. Names, dates, the injury and the outcome in 2 or 3 words each. Short words. Accurate words. The grammar of someone who has thought very hard about what to call things. At the bottom of the list, after the last name, she had written, all present or accounted for. That was all. I put it in a frame on my desk, where it still is. I look at it sometimes when I am trying to remember the correct size of things, when I need to recalibrate what it actually looks like when a person pays the price of both things and keeps going. All present or accounted for. The tree. Still standing. Both halves. She is in San Antonio. She is probably, at this moment, sitting somewhere with a green notebook. She is probably singing to herself. Keeping her pulse at 64. Practicing for the bad moments before they come. The job might need it someday. The job always does.